This rendition of the Mary Rose was inspired by a visit to Portsmouth, England, quite a few years ago, where the remains of the original Mary Rose are being preserved and restored as much as possible. Only about a third of her is still in existence, the rest of it having suffered the ravages of time as she lay in the seabed for several centuries. My model of the Mary Rose is based on plans that I received from the Mary Rose Trust from a man in Alabama who was doing them for the Mary Rose Trust. And as far as I can tell, this is one of the very first models of this particular ship made in the United States. There are no real licenses taken in building the model. It pretty well follows all of the plans the gentleman in Alabama developed for the Mary Rose Trust. The model is basically scratch built. That means it wasn't built directly from a kit of any sort. The term kits in wooden ship models is really a bit of a misnomer. All of these models, Mary Rose included, are built using basically the same techniques as the original ships were constructed with. There is a keel laid, frames or bulkheads laid transverse to that, and then siding put on it to create the hull itself. This particular model is, in a purist sense, not scratch built because the cannons on it were not all forged by myself, and the trees were not cut, and the wood obtained from a forest in my backyard or something of that sort. Sort of follows the idea that in order to make a cherry pie from scratch, first you have to invent the universe. This particular model, though, was done virtually from scratch using old parts and pieces from several kits that I had laying around that were no longer of use. In order to give an idea of scale, there are two archers shown amidships. Some people may question why an archer is being shown. Archery was still a main form of weaponry in the time of Henry VIII. If you look carefully on the end of the yards and on the bowsprit of this model, you will see small hooks or grappling hooks. These were used on the original ship to ensnare the rigging of the opposing ship so the two vessels could be drawn together and the infantry on board each one of the ships could do their dirty work. If you look very carefully, it's hard to spot. There is a cannon in the very bow of the ship, the sort of the precursor to the bow chaser cannons that appeared later, but this one cannon points straight forward next to the bowsprit. Can you find it? Some people also question why there are cannons pointed down into the waist or into the center of the ship from the forecastle and the stern castle. These were there to engage enemy that may have actually been able to board the ship, in which case these cannons would be turned on friend and foe alike to sweep the decks with what was called grape shot, which was basically like a very, very large shotgun. The netting that you see on the model represents the netting which was used to keep enemies from boarding the ship. They were called boarding nets. If soldiers tried to get on board the ship, they would become tangled in this netting, and then they could be dealt with by the crew below. Unfortunately, when the ship sank, this netting precluded many of the people that were on board the ship from escaping. They were tangled in the netting and drowned when the ship went down. The sinking of the Mary Rose was actually witnessed by Henry VIII, as well as the wife of the captain of the ship and the wife of the admiral of the fleet, who was also on board the flagship, the Mary Rose, when she sank. About the only people that were able to escape the sinking were the sailors, which were still aloft in the rigging, handling the sails. This model was actually a gift from me to my wife. after we had visited the original Mary Rose in England.